BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're continuing onward with our discussion about Gary L. Stewart and his book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All. In Part 5, we left off with the possibility of his suspect, Earl Van Best Jr., committing the murder of Sherry Jo Bates back in 1966. Today we're moving onward to Lake Herman Road. Now, to the people who have heard the previous segments, there's one big thing to say. And once again, this is a good place that people would like to jump in, because I said in nearly every single segment leading up to this, how is this guy, Gary Stewart, going to connect his suspect, his biological father, Earl Van Best Jr., to the Zodiac Killer crime scenes? He composed a very well-written and entertaining story, along with the co-writer Susan Mustafa, about Earl Van Best and all the details of his life, but how is he going to connect this guy to the crime scenes? And with Lake Herman Road, I mean, let's hear what Gary Stewart has to say. Perhaps my father had been watching Betty Lou. Her mother would later report to the police that the gate to their home had been found open on several occasions when it should have been closed. The young girl resembled Judy, the way she had looked when Van had forced her to dye her hair black to avoid recognition, while they were on the run. Betty Lou cuddled up next to David, and had no way of knowing that my father perceived that as a betrayal. Van had carefully prepared for this night, realizing that he would not be able to sight his gun if his prey took off running. He had taped a small pen light to the barrel of his .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. David and Betty Lou were oblivious to the man standing just feet away. So you see very clearly in that one, his explanation about what happened at Lake Herman Road is just a maybe. It begins with perhaps. I mean, I mentioned when we started this series that we were probably going to do less than 10 uploads, and I'm hoping to complete this with Lake Berryessa, Blue Rock Springs, and Presidio Heights. Not in that order, of course. We'll use the chronological order. But you just see with that there is no connection to the crime scene. And in short, the reason why Gary Stewart is even saying this possibility at all is that he says that this happened December 20th of 1968. That's Lake Herman Road, the murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. What he says is that Van's wife, Earl Van Best Jr.'s wife that is, was putting up Christmas decorations around the house. So this was his opportunity to get out, and he didn't have an alibi for that evening. But in the previous segment, we said very clearly that any time the baby started crying, Earl Van Best would leave the house. That was very normal for Van to do that. So what's the real connection there? I mean, that's the thing, though, that we have. This is not hard evidence. And if anybody out there thinks that Earl Van Best Jr. is the Zodiac Killer, and I don't think there are that many people out there that would think that, there just does not seem to be the hard evidence of this in this connection. And that's why we were going to read this book. That's why I chose to do this book discussion, because it's like, if you can provide an alternative or just challenge somebody's narrative, I really wanted people to do so. I mean, like, if you have something to say, then just say it. And this book is greatly lacking hard evidence. I mean, there really is a good story about what all of the kind of misdeeds of Earl Van Best Jr., the maliciousness that is associated with this person. And yes, he's a villain. If this were a story, he would be the villain. Even if Earl Van Best Jr. was telling the story, he would be the villain. But you see, though, when it comes to connecting him to Lake Herman Road, it's exactly what I said about Sherry Jo Bates. It's just forced in there. I mean, it's just forced in where it shouldn't belong. I mean, and never mind that it's purely based on assumption. And I think we can have one more look at one more segment here. Near the end of 1968, Van's frustration must have reached a boiling point. He was tired of being married, tired of his screaming child, tired of wondering where Judy was. Judy is, of course, his second wife. His first wife was Annette. His second wife was Judy, and he is now married to his third wife, Edith, who was a citizen of Austria. As Edith began decorating for Christmas, Van began making plans of his own. On December 20th, 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen, an honor student at Hogan High School in Vallejo, about an hour outside of San Francisco, excitedly prepared for her first date with David Faraday. And once again, though, what I have a big problem with in this chapter here is, it's a little bit similar to the Sherry Jo Bates chapter is that this guy, Gary Stewart, wrote this book to try and recreate what happened. He's not writing just a fictional story. Yeah, absolutely, this book is a work of creative nonfiction, but nonfiction all the same, right? This might be acceptable in a novel for him to try and write down Earl Van Best Jr.'s possible thoughts on December 20th of 1968 or October 30th of 1966. In a fictional story, perhaps he could do that, but in a piece of nonfiction, it's just kind of unjustifiable, because how on earth does he know what Earl Van Best Jr. was thinking on December 20th of 1968 or October 30th of 1966? He never met the guy. Yes, this book is based on interviews with his close friends and people who knew him and former associates, but still at the same time, he was just overcome with rage. Pure assumption, and it's not based on evidence. If it were based on evidence, I would be welcoming it. If he had something like a diary from Earl Van Best Jr., and there was a note about something in October, or there was a poem, or just a drawing, or something that could give him this type of feeling, what I really see is two stories going on here. There's a guy who is just an antiques dealer, specializing in antique books and manuscripts and documents. Okay, so, your father sold antique books, and he was a dirtbag. That's one story. You gotta make it a little bit more interesting than that. Oh yeah, maybe he was also the Zodiac Killer. And I said this very clearly in perhaps part one of the early segments, that maybe this guy, Gary Stewart, started learning about his father, and he really found that there was a very strong possibility that he wanted to write a book about it. He wanted to write a book about his own experiences, but how was he going to get people to read it? How was he going to share the story of Earl Van Best? And one way to do it was to tie him to the Zodiac Killer. And there is also the possibility that we would have, the composite sketch and the similarities of the facial structure between the composite sketch and Earl Van Best Jr.'s photographs. I do confess there are a lot of similarities. And at first, when I saw the photo of Earl Van Best Jr., I was like, he doesn't look anything like that composite sketch. Then I began to look a little bit more closely, and then you can actually even see that he has the widow's peak. Just in many of the photos that they show of Earl Van Best, and there aren't that many out there, he has kind of this crest or tuft of hair that kind of covers the widow's peak, but he really does resemble the sketch a lot. The cheekbones, the jawline, the lips. I can see a lot of it there. And I don't really know if Gary Stewart's a genuine believer that his father was the Zodiac Killer or not, because when we did our upload on Steve Hodel, what I said about him was, it was my personal takeaway. And it's, this is just my response. I have to be very clear. I don't know what's in somebody's heart or what's in somebody's mind, but my personal response to that was, it seems like he doesn't genuinely believe his father was the Zodiac Killer. It's that he just wanted to write a book about the similarities between the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac Killer. I genuinely believe Steve Hodel when he says he thinks his father is the Black Dahlia Avenger. It's just, his book, Most Evil Part 2, explores the similarities between the two cases. And for a while, I was really wondering if this book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, was going to go down that road, where Gary Stewart was going to be talking about his biological father and all of the similarities between Earl Van Best Jr. and the Zodiac Killer. I would say, to Gary Stewart's credit, it really does seem like we have the personality of the Zodiac Killer. No matter what we say about how he might be getting fluffy with the details, if this is who Earl Van Best Jr. is, and I gotta tell you, just reading this, at face value, it doesn't seem like all the descriptions of his father are false, and it doesn't seem like all the descriptions of his father and how it matches up to the Zodiac Killer are wrong. I think Earl Van Best Jr. has the personality for the Zodiac, killer, but then again, so do half the suspects out there. I mean, that's the thing, though. Once you actually start looking at other suspects, you can see, well, they just as likely could have this type of Machiavellian personality with narcissistic tendencies. I mean, that's why they've become Zodiac suspects, because other people were very skeptical of the mainstream narrative, and they started noticing something peculiar about this individual that other people had overlooked, and that's how they became a more well-known Zodiac Killer suspect. And yes, of course, let's not kid ourselves. There are people out there who are just trying to sell books. Is Gary Stewart one of them? I mean, that could also be something. Based on the way that he has composed this story, it really seems like there's a lot of heart and soul in it. Like, it seems like you're dealing with some guy who actually wanted to share things about his biological father. It seems like you're dealing with some guy who was actually going on the quest for that. And it seems like someone who was learning a lot about his roots and his origin. And he was born Earl Van Best, and then he grows up to be Gary Stewart, and he wanted his story. But the problem is, though, he cannot tie Earl Van Best to the crime scene. I mean, not having an alibi, we've said very clearly in the Richard Gaikowski upload, I don't want to hear about what somebody didn't do. Okay, he went out on a couple days before Christmas and he didn't tell his wife where he was going. Unacceptable. That means nothing to me. Maybe he went back to the bus stop and was like waiting for girls to come off the school bus and was harassing them the way that he did with his second wife. I can never get over that detail about Earl Van Best Jr. waiting for a 13-year-old girl to get off the bus stop when he's like 26 or 27, something like that. I mean, he sounds like a despicable person. Going back to our discussion on Sherry Jo Bates, we had an interesting comment come in about the possibility of the desktop poem. Now, the desktop poem has two letters at the bottom, and that was R and H. Now, Gary Stewart's explanation is that Earl Van Best Jr. sometimes used the aliases Richard Lee and Harry Lee, and the R is for Richard, the H is for Harry. These are the two aliases that he used. Someone brought up the possibility that it could mean Riverside Halloween, because of course Sherry Jo Bates was murdered on October 30th of 1966. Her body was found on Halloween morning. But, of course, the coroner's report, the autopsy, the forensic examination determined that she had been murdered on October 30th in the nighttime, like in the evening. I think we're dealing with around 10:30, 11 p.m., but of course those things are not always precise because the body was not found. I believe she was found around 6 or 6:30 a.m. by a maintenance worker on the morning of Halloween. So, I mean, I think there could be a certain possibility associated with that, but the problem is, once again, R.H. Riverside Halloween, she was murdered on the 30th. I mean, wouldn't there be something about that? And I'm really starting to think that the desktop poem could just perhaps genuinely be a suicide note that was written by a female. I mean, based on just some of the material that we talked about in that one last time, I don't necessarily know, but it's just something interesting to think about. I don't really buy the explanation about Earl Van Best just carving this thing into a desk while he waited for Sherry Jo Bates to get out of the library. I mean, when did he do that in other examples? A big thing, though, that we got to talk about the motive is that Gary Stewart says that Earl Van Best saw Sherry Jo Bates, and her image reminded him of Judith Chandler, his second wife. So, what happened is that he got filled with rage and he attacked her. The same thing he says about Betty Lou Jensen, that he started stalking her because she looked like Judith Chandler with dyed black hair. I don't know about that one either. That almost sounds like you're really stretching the truth. You are almost forcing the narrative once again. And I mean, I'm just not seeing any connection at all to the Zodiac Killer here, guys, to be honest. That's why I said we probably won't do... We'll conclude the Zodiac things, but as you can see, this guy is spinning circles and he's telling a tall tale, pretty much. And it's a real shame, though, because it seems like there could possibly be a very valuable story here about Earl Van Best. Because I was like, now how could he say that Sherry Jo Bates resembled his ex-wife? But what about the other Zodiac victims? The women in the Zodiac case do not all look the same. And that's a very big thing that we need to think about. So his example is that he forced Judith Chandler to dye her hair black and that Betty Lou Jensen resembled that. That is, I mean, that seems like he just pulled that out of thin air. It's really trying to force the possibility that Earl Van Best would want anything to do with Lake Herman Road. I don't know. I mean, Earl Van Best is in the Bay Area. I'll give him that. And I don't say this to be overly critical, and I don't say this to really try to put Gary Stewart down. It's that he proposed this idea. He proposed this suspect. He wrote a book about it. So we're discussing it. And I gotta tell you, not only am I not convinced, I'm really just kind of, I'm kind of let down, underwhelmed, not even impressed in the slightest. I'm very much impressed about his research regarding the details about his father. That feels like something that somebody put hard work into, and that's its own true crime discussion in itself. I mean, like, he's talking about how Earl Van Best was a media sensation for a while for going on the run with the Sunday Bride, the ice cream romance turned bittersweet. That seems like something very valuable. This stuff connecting him to Lake Herman Road? I don't think so at all. But I would love to hear what you guys think. What do you think about any of the points that we talked about in this upload here? And if you have any comments that you'd like to drop below, I want to see them. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. But most importantly, please drop some comments below so we can continue the discussion. Until next time.